I'm going to do something a little different tonight. I'm going to read a quote, and it's a little bit long, and I think I'm going to have to read it twice. And it's not a Zen quote, it's actually from D.H. Lawrence. Those of you who are literary types, this will maybe make some sense. For some of us, it's going to be a little complex. So I'm going to read it twice. And the quote itself, you'll see right at the beginning, is about poetry. But actually, I think it's about practice. And maybe poetry and practice in some ways are the same. So I think what I'm going to do is the first time I'm going to read it just as he wrote it. As I read it the second time, I think I'm going to put in the word practice, and I mean Zen practice in its widest form. I'm going to put that in, and the language is a little dated in terms of gender. So the first time I'm just going to read it, he just says man, and I'm going to just read it as that. Hear it as man/woman, hear it as all of us, man, woman, queer, gender fluid, all of it. You know, it's an old-fashioned way of when we say man, we're really including it all. So please try to take it in with the acknowledgement that it's an old-fashioned way of speaking. But I want to give the feeling as he wrote it. And I got this, I was perusing on Facebook this morning, and there's a Zen master in New York City named Barry Magid who has been doing a lot of postings on philosophy. And he essentially wrote something of a review of about D.H. Lawrence, the book about D.H. Lawrence, and somebody put this in the commentary, and this really struck me. So this is written by D.H. Lawrence. The essential quality of poetry is that it makes a new effort of attention and, quote, discovers a new world within the known world. Man, animals, and the flowers all live within a strange and forever surging chaos. But man cannot live in chaos. Man must wrap himself in a vision, make a house of apparent form and stability, fixity. In his terror of chaos, he begins by putting up an umbrella between himself and the everlasting whirl. Then he paints the underside of his umbrella like a firmament. Then he parades around, lives and dies under his umbrella. Bequeathed to his descendants, the umbrella becomes a dome, a vault, and men at last begin to feel that something is wrong. Man fixes some wonderful erection of his own between himself and the wild chaos, and gradually goes bleached and stifled under his parasol. Then comes a poet, an enemy of convention, and makes a slit in the umbrella. And lo, the glimpse of chaos is a vision, a window to the sun. But after a while, getting used to the vision and not liking the genuine draught from chaos, commonplace man daubs a simulacrum of the window that opens onto the chaos and patches the umbrella with the painted patch of the simulacrum. I don't know how to say that word. That is, he has gotten used to the vision. It is part of his house decoration, so that the umbrella at last looks like a glowing open firmament of many aspects. But alas, it's all a simulation in innumerable patches. So first, let me just, if you can give a nod or something, does that make any sense as I read it? Can you follow it? And can you have a sense how it plays into our practice? Okay, do I need to read it again? Okay, good, I won't bother. Adam says it's an amazing passage. Yes, it is. All right, I need to have it in front of me. So when we say the essential quality of poetry, let's move that into the essential quality of practice. It's our practice that opens up the new world. I really love this, that it makes a new effort of attention and discovers a new world within the known world. And in so many ways, that's what our practice is about. In so many ways, we face the blandness, if you will, of our own creation. Last week, Eileen, you ended your talk with your story from when you were 12 years old, and you said that the bars of our prison are made by our thoughts. And Eileen, you wondered, where did a 12-year-old come up with that idea? Because we know. And some of us, for some of us, that knowledge, that awareness, that from the behind the screen of what we've created to protect ourselves from the world is aliveness. And you all know, listening to my Dharma talks, that to me, aliveness is what Zen practice is about. We practice so that we can rediscover the aliveness of the moment. But for most of us, that's very difficult. It's a great idea, and we hope for some connection to what D.H. Lawrence talks about, the whirl and the chaos that we're faced with. Zen Master Soeng used to tell a story about a performing bear in a circus. And the bear grew up in the circus, and the bear learned that in order to get fed, she had to perform tricks. And that was her life. And she lived in her cage. She was taken out of her cage to perform and went back into her cage. And that's all she knew. One day, the circus handlers forgot to lock the cage. And the bear left. And this performing bear went off into the forest, into its natural habitat. When I think of this story, I think of it happening in Eastern Europe and going into the dark forests in Eastern Europe. And the bear is in its ancestral home. And it's pleased. It's finally home. And then the bear starts to get hungry. And all the bear knows to do to respond to its hunger is to do tricks. So the bear starts to perform. But there are no humans around to clap. There are no humans around to give it food. So all of its performance is for naught. So what can the bear do? I imagine this with the bear's tail, if a bear has a tail, between its legs, and it scurries back to the cage, and it gets in the cage and closes the door and returns to its life as a performing bear. Obviously, in many ways, that's the story of our lives. We want some freedom. We want that aliveness. Those of us who are drawn to practice are drawn to that aliveness. We curate and try to control our world so much that it becomes dead. and it becomes a chimera of what's possible and what could be. And in this quality of practice that makes a new effort of attention, bringing our attention to the moment. This evening in formal meditation, Marshall said 100 times we'll have to bring ourselves back. Probably that was a little bit of a generous calculation. And in listening to that, I also think it makes a distinction between right and wrong. So it is true, we need to use our practice to bring ourselves back. But practice includes getting lost. When we're thinking about what that conversation was this afternoon and thinking about other things we might have said, that's also a kind of practice. Because in many ways in our practice, we do need to pay attention to what has occurred. Often you'll hear me say, we do need to learn from our experience. But I like the way it's said, we make a new effort of attention and discover a new world within the known world. We're not really looking for a world that's different. The truth is right here. Our teaching is that we're already complete. We already have it. We already are it. Sometimes in English we say, everyone has Buddha nature. To me, that feels too distancing. Everyone and everything is Buddha nature. Even when we're lost in thought, we may lose connection to the vastness, but in that moment of thought, if we're practicing, we can discover the new world within the ordinary world. So be careful, because our imagery can lead us to think we will attain something and we will be something else living in a different universe. But Zen teaching brings us back right here, right now. See what it is we're missing. Through the course of the pandemic, you've heard me talk about my walks up into the hills. And I've often talked about the practice of looking at things that on my walk that I have seen hundreds of times by now, and trying to see what I haven't seen before. And every day I see that. Every day I bring my attention to that question. Every day I find something that I haven't seen before. There was a day about a month ago, I was leaving the Zen Center and I was driving up Parker Street to Telegraph, where I always go when I go to the Zen Center. And if I'm going home, I always turn right for about 2 miles, and then I turn left for a mile, and then I make another right turn and I'm home. And I've been doing that route for over 30 years. And about a month ago, I got in my car and I started driving up Parker Street and I looked up at the hills and I didn't recognize them. It was as if there was a kind of path going down the spine of the hill that I hadn't seen. In over 30 years of looking at that hill, I had never seen it. And maybe I'm telling you I'm a pretty bad Zen practitioner. But I would like to look at it a little differently. I use the moment to wake up. And that is available to each one of us. Our challenge is to do it. Practice any kind of meditation practice, everyday life practice is a wonderful idea. But unless we actually embody it and do it, it's meaningless. We have to do it, and we have to bring all of ourselves to our practice. In some ways, in formal meditation practice, that's a little bit easier because formal meditation practice is concentrated. We try to eliminate distractions. And I think the most important aspect is that it takes concerted effort to do formal Zen sitting. You can't really drift too much. Yes, we lose our attention. For those of us who count our breath, we lose count and then we realize that we've lost it and we come back. The losing count is also part of practice. We get lost and then we are found. It's a process of returning and returning and returning. And then there's the practice of our everyday life. And you know, I'll often say, if you're a meditator who meditates a lot day to day on your own, you might meditate 2 hours a day. You might sit Zen for 2 hours a day. That's a lot of sitting for a person to do on their own every day. And yet, that leaves 22 more hours in your day. Where is your practice for those other 22 hours? If you practice Tibetan style, they'll teach you sleeping meditation. In Korea, sometimes they'll have a month-long retreat where you're not allowed to lie down and sleep. You just practice for 24 hours. Some of us use our dreams as a form of practice. Sometimes a dream is like a koan. We have this experience. I had an experience this week where I woke up out of a dream that had kind of startled me. And the dream brought me immediately to an interaction that I had had with somebody. And that moment opened up the interaction. And it didn't have to do with the other person. I got to feel on a deeper level where I was coming from. Our life is one koan after another. Each moment is that moment to bring our attention and see a new world within the ordinary. In many ways, we can say our everyday practice is to bring our full self, our full awareness and presence to the moment that we are in. Show up and do your best. Maybe it's as simple as that. Moment to moment, show up for what your reality is and use your entire body, mind, and experience to become one, connect, and respond. And Zen teaching offers us 3 basic tools to meet the moment and to do that. 4, actually. And there's probably others. But the first 3 we sometimes call the 3 greats from Chinese Buddhism. Great question, great courage, and great faith. If we can bring all 3 of those to the moment, we have tools to stay present. The first one, great question, really holds all the other ones. If we can really enter the moment and not get lost, as D.H. Lawrence was kind of pointing to the image that we've created, but pierce the image and get behind the image, then we can get the life of the moment. We are the life of the moment. And great question is an amazing, very simple tool to bring. We all know the feeling. Sometimes you have to look for it. But those moments where you've really fallen asleep and you're just relying on your past experience to get you through. We're imagining, well, this is pretty much like always. You know, many of us, probably everybody, in some ways, if we still are working, our job tends to be repetitious. Every job I've ever had, you kind of basically use the tools that you have to meet the moment. And for some, it's kind of mindless. You just move something from here to here. And in that mindlessness, we fall asleep. Now, in my employment, as Marshall says each time, in my day job, I'm a psychotherapist. And being a psychotherapist, you basically have a few tools to apply. But unless I'm present, alert, and using that instruction that D.H. Lawrence gives us of making that effort of attention and discovering the new world within the known. If I'm not doing that, I'm not doing my job. I'm looking around, some people on these in your squares, some of you are teachers, some of you are managers. Every one of us really is called to meet the moment in an alive way. And you know, if someone meets you that way, the interaction is different. And great question allows us to wonder, okay, I know what I think, but what is this? If you're working with someone and you're listening to them, whether you're a teacher or a manager or a customer service person, or you're meeting with a friend or a loved one, what is your capacity to listen? In many ways, attention is listening. When we get into a conflict with someone, we often want them to do it differently. If you were different, we wouldn't have this trouble. But remember, that's what the other person will say to us. But we're always pointing our finger this way. You did this. But great question helps us remember, oh, did they really? What did I do? And yes, they may have done something, but where did my reaction come from? That's what my dream pointed me to. My dream pointed me to some primal wounds, really, some ways in my family of origin where I started to react to things. And some of it may have even predated whatever my family of origin did. I may have been born into this world with, for me, just to be a little transparent, it's a high startle response. And so sometimes my reactivity is bigger than what the situation calls for. And in many ways, it's taken me over 60 years to start to discover this and work with it. So we have to keep making, now I'm on the second grade, making the effort to show up and use this great question. Effort is pivotal. We all know that feeling of losing our energy and losing our ability to make an effort. And those of us who've done long retreats, we know those sitting periods where we're just trying to get through and we don't have the effort in us. Okay, that's not good or bad. It just is. Again, those of us who've done long retreats know how miserable those sessions can be. It actually makes everything more alive if we make an effort. If we actually pay attention and use our effort to meet the moment, to muster our energy and use it. Zen practice is not passive. Zen practice is not theoretical. There is Zen teaching and Zen theory, but that is candy. That's some kind of approximation of what we're all being pointed to work on. The only way to get fruit from your practice is to make effort. The teaching will help you a little bit. The practice will transform your life, or at least may transform your life. So Zen Master Bon would always say, just do it. When you're doing something, do it. That is great effort. The third tool is great faith. Many of you have heard me talk about the fact that faith is the hardest thing for me to talk about, or the hardest of those three. And when I was thinking about this talk and thinking about faith, I watched my mind. The first thing I said was faith in something. And then after a while, I think I was lying in bed actually going to sleep, and I was just working with this a little bit. And suddenly I said, faith that. Faith that is different than faith in. And then I stripped away the word that and just came back to the experience of faith. Now, I'm sure that that experience of faith is different for each one of us. As a felt sense, it's different. But I think here I'm just trying to encourage you to experientially feel what faith is for you, how it shows up for you, and then use that as a resource as you're practicing with great question and great effort or great courage. That faith, that sense of faith, can help keep us going, can buoy us enough to help us float. Maybe as an image we can float on our faith, and it allows us, without making good or bad or right or wrong, apply ourselves to the moment. And just with faith, that's correct. Now I went back to faith that. It's very hard to talk about it, but experientially, you know what effort is like. Experientially, you know what faith is like. And experientially, you know what great question means. We can talk about it, but question is an experience. Sometimes I call it awe, curiosity, wonder. These are all words pointing to some experience. Zen is experience. Zen practice is experience, not story. So I started to say there are 3 tools we have, and I said, oh no, maybe there's 4. And the 4th one I just want to touch on for a couple of minutes and then leave some time for questions. But the 4th one is very simply the Bodhisattva way. How can I help? In this moment, how can I apply this great question and this effort for the benefit of all? Can I orient my life to move from selfishness? I'm sorry, I'm going to do this, but I also want to qualify it. To move from selfishness to selflessness. As a general term, that's true, but remember that selflessness includes some selfishness. If you don't take care of yourself, you're really not going to be any good at taking care of others. And in many ways, if you really break down the barriers, self and other, is just an arbitrary distinction. I'm not going to have time to get to it, but I was looking up some of the story of Wan Hyo. And Wan Hyo, his basic experience was he went into this, our teaching is he was at an oasis, but the way I read about it, he went into a tomb as he was on a pilgrimage to China, and he reached for a cup that was next to him, and he drank this water. He was very thirsty, and he had a relaxing experience from that, and he went to sleep. The next morning he woke up and he looked to his side and he saw what he thought was a cup was actually a skull of a recently killed animal. It still had blood in it and meat was still hanging from it, and there were maggots in the water. And when he saw that, he threw up. And when he threw up, he attained enlightenment. And his enlightenment was, in the evening, I thought it was wonderful. I felt great. In the morning, I thought it was disgusting, and it made me throw up. Mind makes everything. And basically, in Asia, when they talk about the teaching of Wan Hyo, it centers on no distinctions. Reality is as it is, whatever that is. And we color that reality with good and bad, right and wrong. And we get that in some ways is those thought bars that Eileen talked about last week. And it's also the construction of the umbrella that we put over ourselves. We make good, bad, right, wrong concepts, ideas, and we surround ourselves with that. And by caring about others, by being willing to help, and by using great question, great courage, and great faith, we can break through the artificiality of that thought, feeling construct and wake up to the vibrancy of this very moment. And to me, at least, that is Zen practice. So I encourage us all to do it. And there's one little piece that D.H. Lawrence pointed to, is that we all have these experiences when we make effort that we cut a hole in the umbrella. But even for the best of us, it's too easy to cover over that hole and make it into a picture instead of a real slit in the umbrella. So no matter what you've attained yesterday, or last year, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, that attainment needs to be alive today. We're always needing to put slits in the umbrella. And our practice is a tool we have to be able to make those cuts. I couldn't find it, and I don't have a copy of Dropping Ashes on the Buddha in my house, but I think the story of Wan Hyo actually goes on to where he's become this very famous teacher, and he's very well respected, and somebody comes to him and shows him how dead his practice had become. He had gotten lost in the beauty of the robes that he wore, and everybody bowing to him, and everybody saying how wonderful he was. That killed his practice. And he had to leave the temple, go out back into the chaos, if you will, to reconnect with that aliveness. So life is a spiral. It goes around and around and around. We're always having to come back to this moment and bare ourselves and be willing to be touched. Be open and keep that great question.